The Agĩkũyũ are discussed in very many pre-colonial and colonial documents, and in the previous video I discussed the 3 reasons why that is so, even though of course all the communities in Kenya today are discussed in the pre-colonial and colonial documents. There seems to be a lot more discussing the Agĩkũyũ, and you can go check that video. Now in this video I'm going to go through, or to give you a list of 5 documents, pre-colonial and colonial documents, that you can read and see how the Agĩkũyus are portrayed. And they are very interesting books, and very many people will agree with me that these are very important books. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are other books. There are very many books, of course. Now, of course, I've said that most of these books, you can get them at the National Archives, or you can get them at the archive.org or gutenberg.org. Those two, even the University of Nairobi, I've seen that they have a platform, a portal where they publish these old documents. You can go there and check some of these documents. Some of them are still sold, some of them, and one of them that I'm going to talk about is very expensive. You can get it at a price as high as 30-something thousand shillings, or if you are lucky, 20,000 shillings. A book. It's just a book, actually, that is very expensive. But it's a book that very many people who've read it will tell you, if you want to understand the Agĩkũyũ before 1903, and if you know, I've already given up part of the title. It's a book that will give you the arrangement of the Gĩkũyũ society, their political organization, and things like that. Anyway, I'm coming to that book. Now, let's go through, and I've read almost all these books. At least there is one that I've not finished, but I've read all of them to some extent at least. Now, number 1 is the East Africa Protectorate by Sir Charles Eliot. Now, Sir Charles Eliot is not just any other European. Sir Charles Eliot, we could say, was the first president of the country we know today as Kenya. Of course, he wasn't like president. They used to call them commissioners. And he was the overall guy in charge of the East Africa Protectorate then. He was appointed around 1894, 1895, after Kenya was bought by the British government from the Imperial British East Africa. He became the first commissioner, the first president. Of course, he was a civil servant from Britain, and he served up until maybe 1902, and he resigned because there were issues, allegations of corruption, specifically around land, of course, around land, and he resigned. And he wrote a book, the East Africa Protectorate, of course, explaining his stay here, the people, the geography, the culture, the political organization of the different people. He talks about different groups of people, and he also discusses the Agĩkũyũ. He talks about the land issue around Mount Kenya and the rest of Kenya, of course. And he shares very interesting things that will shock you, actually. Very interesting things about Kenya, especially as a Kenyan. You look back and you look at the text and you'll be like, okay, so this happened, or this is how things happened before. Sometimes we don't get it. We're so lost into the independence era. We don't know what actually happened, even though what happened before affects our lives today. So that's the first book I recommend you read. The second book I recommend you read, if you want to understand Kenya and specifically understand how the British viewed the people today in Kenya, the Agĩkũyũ specifically, and the others. And of course, I need to say that, of course, you need to read these books with the understanding that most of these people are writing with a racial hierarchy framework. And if you don't know the racial hierarchy framework, it means the understanding of human society was that people were in ranks based on their race. The Europeans were, of course, at the top, and then maybe the Asiatic second, and then some people third, and then, of course, the Black Africans at the bottom. And even with the Africans, you realize that they try. When you read this document, you realize that they try to rank different groups of people. These groups, for example, the earliest, like the East Africa Protectorate, Sir Charles Eliot seems to rank, for example, the Somalis and the Maasais to be above the Gĩkũyus, and the Gĩkũyus to be sort of above the Kavirondo people, the Luos and the Luyas. So there is that. So the racial hierarchy framework is a very interesting framework, and when you read this document, you have to have it in your mind so that you understand most of these things you read in the books in the right context. Now, of course, the second book is The Bantu Magic and Beliefs by C.W. Hobley. Now, C.W. Hobley is also another European who is not just another European or another British. He was a very senior administrative officer. He served as a provincial commissioner, district commissioner earlier on in Mumias and then Naivasha. He went to the coast. In fact, in coast, right now, there is the affordable housing project named Hobley Estate. It's named after him. He, at some point, in fact, there was a time he acted as the overall commissioner of the protectorate when I think the guy who was there had left. Could be Sir Charles Eliot had left. He of course, acted for, I think, like a month before a new guy was brought in. But generally, he was a district commissioner, a provincial commissioner, served for close to 30 years around Kenya. And he writes this book. This book is primarily about the Agĩkũyũ and their Kamba, their political organization, their customs, their religious practices, everything about those two societies. A very interesting book. Of course, again, you need to read it with the understanding of the racial hierarchy framework. Now, number 3 is The Kenyan Diary by Richard Meinertzhagen. Now, Richard Meinertzhagen is a very interesting character. He was a military officer, British, but at some point, I think he went and became a citizen. Became a citizen of Israel, if I'm not wrong, at some point, but he was British. And he came to Kenya in 1902, most likely 1902. Yeah, 1902. And he stayed around for close to 6 or 7 years. Now, a significant part of that time he spent in central Kenya. He spent it in Murang'a Fort Hall. Then they used to call it Fort Hall. In fact, he is the guy who founded Nyeri. And in fact, he's the guy who insisted that Nyeri be called Nyeri, because there was another guy who went by the name Hinde, who was a commissioner. Hinde was insisting on giving it a different name, but he insisted, let's give it the name the locals call a nearby hill. I think they used to call it Nyeri, and he insisted it to be called Nyeri. So this is a diary he kept, and he used to, of course, write it every day. Now, at some point in 1950s, it was published as a book, and it covers the period from 1902 to 1906. Another very important event he captures in that diary is his expedition to the Nandi country and the murder or the assassination of Koitalel Arap Samoei. Now, that's the third book. The fourth book I'll recommend you read is John Boyes, The King of the Wa-Kikuyu. Now, John Boyes was a conman. Let's start from there. He was a conman, and you need to read this book with the understanding that he was a conman. He went to Kikuyu land. He conned the people. He conned, I think it was called Chief Kinyanjui. He conned him a lot of ivory tusk, and then ran to the coast. He sold all the ivory. He had promised Chief Kinyanjui and others that he was going to bring them money. He left, went with a lot of money to UK, and started telling everyone that he was the king of the Wa-Kikuyu, that he had been made to be the king. Now, you need to read this book, though, because of course, he was a conman, but he covers things that he did in Kikuyu land day to day, and of course, not everything is going to be a lie there, because there are other people who have said actually he was in Kikuyu land. So it's not like he created this story of him going to Kikuyu land, meeting the likes of Chief Wang'ombe, befriending them, and of course conning them. Yeah, it's a very interesting book, actually. John Boyes, The King of the Wa-Kikuyu. Published could be 19 or something. It's a very old text, actually. And then there is the Southern Kikuyu before 1903. This is by Louis Leakey, who was a paleoanthropologist and archaeologist. He's, of course, from the Leakey family. Leakey family is well known throughout the world. Now, this book was published in 1977. It's not as old as the others, but it's a very interesting book because it tells you, or it covers significantly, the Agĩkũyũ Republic, very significantly, very detailed. And Louis Leakey was initiated into the tribe or into the nation. And of course, he admits that he rose through the ranks to some level. He did not go all the way, because there is a point where the elders told him, you cannot rise above this because you are not native Gĩkũyũ, and but he did get initiated into the nation and did go through some ranks. And of course, like many other societies, the knowledge you got of the people depended on the rank of initiation. And so, going by how far he rose, he collected a lot of information that then he put into this book that was published in 1977. It's a very voluminous book, it's a huge book, and it's a very expensive book. You can get it at around 20 something thousand and all the way to 30 something thousand, depending on the bookshop where you get it. It's a rare book though, but it's a book that everybody will tell you should read. Yeah, so those are my 5 books that I recommend you read if you want to understand how the Kikuyu were covered in documents pre-colonial and the colonial period. Of course, this is not like the entire list. There are so many books that talk about the Kikuyu. There are many that I have not read, I'm planning to read, and there are many that I don't know about, of course. And yeah, this can be a very, very, very long list.